What if the shadows told the truth, and the light was the real illusion? The world of classic film noir was drenched in danger, despair, and moral decay. Every cigarette glow hinted at betrayal. Every silhouette carried a secret. These weren't just movies. They were confessions carved in shadow. So let's descend into the darkness and uncover the top 15 film noirs you can watch on YouTube. Number 15, DOA, 1949. It begins with a dead man walking into a police station to report his own murder. That chilling idea made DOA one of the most striking and cynical noirs of its time. Released in 1949, it told the story of Frank Bigelow, a man poisoned with a rare toxin and given only days to live. He spends those last hours racing against time through neon alleys and smoky bars trying to discover who killed him and why. What made DOA stand apart wasn't just its haunting premise, but its brutal honesty about fate and futility. Audiences were stunned by the pacing and the nightmarish editing that seemed to blur reality and hallucination. Critics called it relentless and feverish, while studios feared it was too bleak for mass audiences. Even so, its low-budget grit captured the true heart of noir, desperation against impossible odds. Behind the scenes, director Rudolph Maté shot much of the film guerrilla style across Los Angeles, using real locations instead of sets. This gave it a documentary rawness long before the style became fashionable. The production nearly collapsed midway when funding ran out, and the crew worked unpaid for days just to finish. Yet, somehow, that sense of urgency bled into every frame. For years, DOA was lost to rights confusion and poor preservation until it resurfaced online, becoming a cult staple for noir lovers. Watching it today feels like finding a confession scrawled in cigarette ash, a reminder that sometimes death is only the beginning of the story. Number 14, The Hitchhiker, 1953. The Hitchhiker remains the only classic noir directed by a woman during the Golden Age. Ida Lupino. Released in 1953, this harrowing story of two friends kidnapped by a psychotic drifter was based on a true crime spree that terrified post-war America. It dared to strip noir of glamour, replacing trench coats and jazz with dusty roads and raw fear. The film opens in the blinding desert, where two friends on a fishing trip pick up a stranger whose charm curdles into menace. What follows is a psychological duel of survival. The tension never lets up. Lupino's direction transforms the open landscape into a trap with nowhere to hide. Every long stretch of highway becomes another question about human nature. What do you do when morality dies of thirst? Studios initially refused to distribute it, fearing audiences wouldn't accept a woman's name on such a violent story. Lupino fought back, filming it independently with borrowed cameras and crew. When it finally hit, Screen's critics hailed it as too real for comfort. Some theaters even banned it, claiming it was too disturbing. Despite limited release, the film's reputation grew with time. Today, it is recognized as a feminist milestone and one of noir's most nerve-wracking thrillers. Its cold realism inspired generations of filmmakers from Scorsese to the Coen brothers. Watching The Hitchhiker now feels like staring straight into the soul of fear and realizing it looks back. Number 13, Detour, 1945. Shot in less than a week with a shoestring budget, Detour is proof that noir doesn't need money. It needs madness. This bleak road movie follows Al Roberts, a failed pianist who hitchhikes his way into a nightmare. After an accidental death, he assumes another man's identity only to fall prey to the venomous Vera, a woman whose voice could cut through glass. Director Edgar G. Ulmer worked outside the studio system using leftover sets and recycled film stock. That grime became its power. The lighting was harsh, the angles distorted, and the dialogue sharp enough to draw blood. Critics at first dismissed it as trash, but audiences whispered about it like a guilty secret. It captured something no studio film dared, the feeling that fate itself was rigged. Rumors swirled that Ulmer modeled Vera after a real lover who betrayed him, adding layers of bitterness to every scene. Anne Savage's performance as Vera is still considered one of the most terrifying portrayals in cinema. She didn't need violence to dominate. Her words were weapons. Over time, Detour went from forgotten B-picture to national treasure preserved by the Library of Congress. It is now free on YouTube in pristine restoration. Watching it feels like drifting through a fog of regret, where every choice leads deeper into darkness. It isn't just a movie, it's a trap you can't escape. Number 12, Scarlet Street, 1945. When Scarlet Street hit theaters in 1945, audiences thought they were getting a simple crime melodrama. What they got instead was a psychological inferno about lust, greed, and humiliation, directed by the German master Fritz Lang. Edward G. Robinson plays Christopher Cross, a timid cashier, and Sunday painter whose dull life collapses after he falls for a beautiful schemer named Kitty, played with hypnotic cruelty by Joan Bennett. The story unravels like a fever dream. Cross saves Kitty from an abusive boyfriend and begins secretly painting her portraits thinking he has found love and purpose. But Kitty and her lover Johnny conspire to exploit him, selling his paintings under her name. What begins as flattery descends into moral decay and murder. Laying drenches every scene in shadows, rain, slick streets, fogged windows, and faces half swallowed by guilt. Behind the camera, chaos brewed. The film was nearly banned by censors for its blunt depiction of adultery and moral collapse. In some American cities, screenings were halted for being indecent. Fritz Lang, still haunted by his years fleeing Nazi Germany, used the film to dissect American hypocrisy, showing how greed could masquerade as romance and how art could hide obsession. Joan Bennett's chilling performance almost did not happen because studio executives wanted a more glamorous lead. Lang refused, insisting that Bennett understood the cruelty beneath beauty. The film became a success overseas, but faced moral outrage at home. For decades, Scarlet Street vanished due to tangled ownership rights, surviving only through poor prints. Today it stands as one of noir's bleakest masterpieces, a portrait of self-destruction painted in sorrow. Watching it now feels like reading a diary you were never meant to find, one where every confession bleeds into madness. Number 11. The Big Combo, 1955. The Big Combo is not just a noir. It is a gunshot wrapped in fog. Directed by Joseph H. Lewis, it pushed the genre into new extremes of brutality and desire. The film follows Police Lieutenant Leonard Diamond as he obsessively hunts mob boss Mr. Brown, not only to uphold the law, but because he is secretly obsessed with Brown's lover, Susan Lowell. That obsession drives the story like a ticking bomb. Shot in 1955, The Big Combo was infamous for its visual daring. Cinematographer John Alton used darkness like a weapon, with scenes lit only by the gleam of a gun or the glint of sweat on a terrified face. Every frame oozes menace. The title refers to both the criminal syndicate and the twisted psychological combination of power, lust, and weakness binding every character. But The Big Combo faced heavy censorship. The Production Code Administration forced cuts to scenes deemed too sadistic or suggestive. One sequence showing a woman's implied torture was so disturbing that foreign distributors banned the film entirely. Even with the edits, its cruelty lingered like smoke in a closed room. Behind the scenes, Lewis clashed with producers who wanted a safer story. He refused, saying no one in this world is clean. Critics dismissed it at first, but later scholars praised it as the purest expression of noir fatalism. Its style influenced directors like David Lynch and Quentin Tarantino, who borrowed its lighting and twisted romance. Watching The Big Combo today feels like staring into human obsession and realizing the darkness never ends. It is a film where desire and corruption are the same heartbeat. Number 10. Kansas City Confidential, 1952. Before Tarantino made criminals talk like poets, Kansas City Confidential gave them nightmares for dialogue. Directed by Phil Carlson in 1952, it was a heist story drenched in paranoia. A tale of men wearing masks not just on their faces but over their souls. The plot begins with a meticulously planned armored car robbery. Each of the four thieves wears a mask, so none can identify the others. When an innocent delivery man named Joe Rolfe is framed for the crime, the story spirals into vengeance and moral ambiguity. Rolfe hunts the real culprits across Mexico, uncovering a web of betrayal far deeper than money. The film struck nerves across post-war America. The idea that a veteran could be wrongly accused by corrupt authorities resonated with audiences living under the shadow of McCarthy-era suspicion. Critics praised its realism, while police departments condemned it for glorifying crime. In some southern states, theaters refused to screen it entirely. Behind the camera, Carlson battled executives who wanted a predictable ending. He fought for ambiguity, instead leaving viewers with no clean justice and no clear heroes. The final scene haunts anyone who believes in moral clarity. Kansas City Confidential later inspired generations of crime filmmakers. Its structure became the blueprint for Reservoir Dogs. For years, it disappeared until restored and uploaded online, where new audiences discovered its brutal rhythm and moral despair. Today, it stands as a grim warning about the masks we wear. In a world built on lies, truth itself becomes the greatest disguise. Number 9. The Killing, 1956. Before Stanley Kubrick became a legend, he was just a young filmmaker with a ruthless eye and a stolen camera crew. The Killing, released in 1956, turned the heist film inside out. It followed a group of desperate men planning the perfect racetrack robbery where every move, every second was timed like a symphony of greed. The plan was flawless until human nature intervened. Johnny Clay, the mastermind, played by Sterling Hayden, believed precision could defeat fate. But Kubrick's camera told a different story. Every face, every glance hinted at betrayal. The overlapping timelines and fractured structure made audiences dizzy. Nothing like it had ever been seen. Critics said it felt less like a crime movie and more like a slow explosion of doom. Behind the scenes, the chaos was real. Kubrick clashed with producers who demanded a conventional narrative. He refused tearing pages from the script hours before filming and rewriting entire scenes on the spot. Sterling Hayden later called it organized madness, but he admitted it gave the film its electricity. The censors nearly blocked the release for its shocking violence and moral pessimism. Studios feared audiences would find it too dark. Yet over time, The Killing became a cult icon, inspiring filmmakers from Tarantino to Nolan. Its structure directly shaped Reservoir Dogs and Memento. Watching it now feels like peering into a clockwork heart that's seconds away from bursting. Every betrayal feels inevitable. Every bullet feels personal. The Killing is not about crime. It's about control slipping through your fingers. Number 8. Gun Crazy, 1949. Few films captured obsession like Gun Crazy. Released in 1949 and directed by Joseph H. Lewis, it told the story of a young marksman and the woman who turned his passion into his downfall. Barter loved guns but hated killing until he met Annie Laurie Starr, a carnival sharpshooter with eyes like fire and no fear of death. Together they burned through the screen like dynamite. The film's energy was feverish. Their crimes were filmed with long, unbroken takes that placed the audience inside the getaway car. You felt every breath, every heartbeat. Critics later called it the first truly modern crime romance. At the time, it was condemned as dangerous, immoral, and even unpatriotic. The Production Code Office tried to bury it for its sympathetic view of criminals. Joseph H. Lewis refused to tone it down, filming on location in abandoned towns and empty highways. The rawness of those landscapes turned love into doom. The actors fired real guns in some scenes because the budget could not afford props. When Gun Crazy hit theaters, it divided audiences. Some saw it as perverse, others saw it as poetry. Decades later, French critics would hail it as a masterpiece of rebellion, comparing it to Bonnie and Clyde. It influenced the entire New Wave movement across Europe. Watching Gun Crazy today feels like watching passion eat itself alive. It is a film where every heartbeat sounds like a gunshot, and every embrace feels like a confession whispered in smoke. Number 7. Night in the City, 1950. No film captured desperation quite like Night in the City. Released in 1950 and directed by Jules Dassin, it was a scream of anguish from a filmmaker blacklisted by his own country. Dassin shot it in London after being exiled from Hollywood, accused of sympathies he never confessed. The result was a masterpiece dripping with despair and grime. The film follows Harry Fabian, a hustler played by Richard Widmark, who dreams of becoming a wrestling promoter. He sees one last chance at greatness and grabs it with both hands, dragging everyone around him into ruin. The streets of London become a labyrinth of betrayal, where every flickering light hides another broken promise. Behind the camera, Dassin was living the story himself. Hunted by the American film industry, he poured his rage and heartbreak into every frame. He shot on real locations at night, giving the film a sickly glow that critics later called the texture of a nightmare. The British censors wanted to cut scenes they deemed too bleak, but Dassin fought to keep them. He said the world had earned its darkness. The studio even released 2 endings, one tragic, one slightly hopeful. Neither offered escape. When it finally reached American theaters, it flopped. Too dark, too hopeless, they said. Yet decades later, Night in the City became one of noir's crown jewels. Scholars called it the final cry of the genre before it drowned in its own sorrow. Watching it now feels like walking through a graveyard of broken dreams. You can almost hear the echo of Dassin's defiance whispering through the fog. If you take everything from a man, he becomes his own. Shadow. Number 6. The Asphalt Jungle, 1950. Before Ocean's 11 glamorized the heist, there was The Asphalt Jungle, a film that stripped crime down to nerves, sweat, and failure. Released in 1950 and directed by John Huston, it was one of the first true ensemble noirs where every character had a motive, and every motive led to ruin. The story begins with a master plan. A criminal mastermind just out of prison assembles a team for a jewel robbery that should make them all rich. But this is no Hollywood fantasy. The streets are cold, the rooms are empty, and the city itself feels like an accomplice waiting to betray them. Each man dreams of escape, but destiny has already written their endings. Behind the camera, Huston fought studio executives who wanted a moral ending. He refused to soften his vision. When censors demanded punishment for every criminal, he found a poetic loophole: each man would meet justice through fate, not through law. That subtle defiance turned the film into a philosophical tragedy. It also marked the breakout of a young actress named Marilyn Monroe, whose brief appearance as a kept woman hinted at the vulnerability that would define her career. Many did not even notice her name on the credits until years later, when fame cast its long shadow back onto the film. When The Asphalt Jungle premiered, critics called it dangerous for showing criminals as human beings. The FBI condemned it for glamorizing thieves. Houston replied that he was not celebrating them, but exposing them. The film later inspired everything from Rififi to The Killing. Today it feels timeless, a story where loyalty collapses under greed and dreams crumble into dust. Watching it is like hearing the heartbeat of crime itself, slowing, fading beneath the city's roar. Number 5. Out of the Past, 1947. If one film defines noir, it is Out of the Past. Released in 1947 and directed by Jacques Tourneur, it is pure shadow distilled into poetry. Robert Mitchum plays Jeff Bailey, a man trying to bury his past in a quiet town until fate digs it back up. When his former boss sends for him, the ghosts return wearing lipstick and lies. The story unfolds through flashbacks like smoke curling in a darkened room. Jeff was once a private detective hired to find Kathy Moffat, the mistress who shot her lover and vanished. But when he found her, he fell for her. It was the oldest trap in the book. From then on, every choice pulled him deeper into ruin. Behind the scenes, Tourneur crafted atmosphere like no one else. The fog was real. The Shadow's hand painted the dialogue razor sharp. Mitchum reportedly ad-libbed lines that became immortal, like "Baby, I don't care." Jane Greer's Kathy was more than a femme fatale, she was fatalism in a dress. Censors tried to cut lines they called too cynical. Tourneur refused, saying honesty was the only morality noir had left. The film underperformed at release, but time turned it into legend. Directors, from Scorsese to Nolan, still study its structure, its silences, its doomed tenderness. Watching Out of the Past feels like standing in moonlight that refuses to warm you. Every word drips with regret. Every glance says it's too late. It is not just noir. It is destiny wearing a fedora. Number 4. The Third Man, 1949. There has never been another film quite like The Third Man. Directed by Carol Reed and written by Graham Greene, it was released in 1949 and became the haunting echo of post-war Europe itself. The story follows Holly Martins, a naive American writer who travels to Vienna to meet his old friend Harry Lime, only to discover Lime is dead, or so it seems. When Martins begins asking questions, he learns that nothing in Vienna's ruined streets is what it appears. And when Lime finally emerges alive, standing in the shadows beneath a streetlight, with that smile, the film becomes myth. The production was chaos. Reed shot in the real bombed-out ruins of Vienna at night, using tilted angles and dripping sewers to mirror moral decay. Orson Welles, who played Lime, refused to show up for days, forcing Reed to film with doubles. Welles later improvised the famous cuckoo clock speech, turning philosophy into menace. Censors wanted to cut the sewer chase for being too disturbing. The studio argued over endings. Reed insisted on keeping the bleak final walk in the cemetery one of cinema's greatest finales. When it premiered, audiences were stunned. The zither score became a hit single. Critics called it the most perfect example of controlled madness. Over time, The Third Man became a template for mystery thrillers everywhere. Watching it today, you can feel the moral rot of a world rebuilding itself on lies. Every echo in that sewer still whispers the same truth. Friendship dies faster than innocence. Number 3. Double Indemnity, 1944. If Out of the Past was noir's soul, then Double Indemnity was its heartbeat. Released in 1944 and directed by Billy Wilder, this film didn't just define the genre, it gave it fangs. The story unfolds through confession, a dying insurance salesman recording his sins into a dictaphone as he bleeds out in an empty office. That voiceover, that guilt, became noir's signature. Fred MacMurray plays Walter Neff, an ordinary man pulled into extraordinary corruption when he meets Phyllis Dietrichson, a housewife with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. Together they plan the perfect murder, an insurance scam that promises wealth and passion, but guarantees doom. Every scene drips with heat and suspicion. Every glance feels like a sin waiting to happen. Behind the camera, chaos brewed. Wilder's script, co-written with Raymond Chandler, was a battle of egos and genius. The two men despised each other, but their tension sparked perfection. Chandler's dialogue slashed like a razor. Wilder's direction turned every shadow into a confession booth. Barbara Stanwyck, Portrayal of Phyllis terrified the censors. Her anklet became a symbol of temptation so powerful it almost got the film banned. The Production Code Office nearly shut it down for glorifying murder. Wilder fought back, arguing it was a warning, not a fantasy. He won barely. The film shocked audiences with its cynicism and made Stanwyck the most dangerous woman on screen. Critics called it too amoral for public taste, but time turned it into a masterpiece studied in film schools worldwide. Every noir that followed owes it a debt. Double Indemnity proved that evil could whisper in the language of romance. Watching it now feels like reading a love letter written in blood, where every word is a trap and every heartbeat counts down to betrayal. Number 2. Touch of Evil, 1958. Touch of Evil was the last breath of classic noir and the first gasp of something darker. Released in 1958, it was directed, written, and partly destroyed by Orson Welles. The film opens with one of cinema's greatest shots, a single take that follows a car through a Mexican border town before it explodes in the night. That tracking shot wasn't just technical brilliance, it was prophecy. The world was about to detonate. The story follows corrupt police captain Hank Quinlan, played by Welles himself, a bloated giant of decay. Opposite him stands Charlton Heston as a Mexican narcotics agent trying to expose Quinlan's crimes while protecting his wife from a web of conspiracy. It's a story about borders, both political and moral, about how justice rots when power grows fat. Behind the scenes, Universal executives panicked. Welles turned in a rough cut that defied all convention, overlapping dialogue, crooked camera angles, shadows that swallowed faces. They re-edited it without his approval. In despair, Welles wrote a 58-page memo begging the studio to restore his vision. Decades later, editors found it and reconstructed the film to his design. The restored version revealed a masterpiece hiding under studio fear. When it first premiered, audiences didn't know what to make of it. Critics called it confusing, even ugly. But modern viewers see it as the bridge between noir and modern cinema. Its sound, its movement, its chaos inspired everyone from David Lynch to Paul Thomas Anderson. Watching Touch of Evil today feels like witnessing a funeral for morality itself. Quinlan's dying breath echoes through the swamp as the camera drifts away. It whispers the truth noir always knew. Corruption doesn't die. It just changes uniforms. Number 1. Sunset Boulevard, 1950. Few films ever dared to stare at Hollywood's corpse as coldly as Sunset Boulevard. Released in 1950 and directed by Billy Wilder, it wasn't just a noir, it was a requiem for fame itself. The story opens with a dead man floating face down in a swimming pool narrating his own murder. It was the ultimate noir image, beauty and decay sharing the same reflection. William Holden plays Joe Gillis, a struggling screenwriter who stumbles into the crumbling mansion of Norma Desmond, a silent film star long forgotten by the industry that once worshipped her. She lives in illusion, speaking to ghosts and watching her old films in the dark. Joe becomes her companion, her prisoner, and eventually her victim. Behind the camera, Wilder built a nightmare of glamour and rot. The real Paramount studio lot appears throughout the film. Gloria Swanson, once a real silent film queen, plays Norma with terrifying authenticity. Her line, "I am big, it's the pictures that got small," became one of cinema's eternal truths. The movie blurred reality and fiction until even the crew whispered that Swanson was channeling her own ghosts. The studio feared it would offend Hollywood royalty. Several executives tried to stop its release, calling it too cruel, too personal. Wilder refused to cut a frame. The result was a scandal. Some stars walked out of its premiere, others wept. But audiences were transfixed. The film won 3 Oscars and secured immortality. Today, Sunset Boulevard feels more prophetic than ever. It predicted the cult of fame, the hunger for youth, the madness of nostalgia. Watching it is like looking into a mirror that shows your soul rotting behind the smile. It wasn't just the end of an era, it was the scream that announced its death. Film noir was never about heroes or endings. It was about reflection, about watching our own darkness flicker across the screen. These films still whisper through time, warning that every shadow hides a truth we'd rather ignore. So, which of these lost masterpieces will you watch tonight? Hit like, subscribe, and dive into the next descent into cinematic darkness.